Good afternoon. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to the 2019 Harmony webinar series. My name is Christy Weeks, and I am the Digital Media Manager for Harmony. Today's presentation, The Role of Cognitive Skills and Brain Function in Recovery, Building a Strong Foundation for Success, is presented by Andrea Pittman with the Nectar Group in Greenwood Village, Colorado. For those of you who are new to Harmony, let's see here. We are nestled on a 43-acre campus in the Rocky Mountains, just outside of Estes Park, Colorado. Our Colorado Residential Rehab offers comprehensive treatment for adults and their family members. Who is Harmony Foundation? On our why factor, we believe that long-term recovery from alcohol and other drugs is possible. And how do we do it? As a place between two worlds, our location in the Rockies provides a safe and quiet respite from the pain of addiction. With 50 years of treating addiction, we have fostered a generation of long-term recovery who supports our clients and families for a lifetime. Harmony staff at all levels of the organization work together to create a community of recovery support that is long-lasting. Who are we? We are a 70-bed residential treatment program located, as I said before, in the base of the Rocky Mountain National Park in Estes Park, and we offer an evidence-based 12-step program that is gender responsive. To learn more about Harmony Foundation, we invite you to visit us at www.harmonyfoundationinc.com or contact our admissions staff at 866-686-7867. As we move through the presentation today, there are just a few housekeeping items to keep in mind. You will be receiving an email within an hour after the presentation. Please be sure to complete the online evaluation. You must be actively engaged in the presentation for at least 45 minutes in order to receive a certificate. We use a system that tracks how long people are engaged in the program, so anything less than that would not qualify for a certificate through NADAC for CEUs. However, we can provide an attendance certificate if you need to jump off early. You will receive your certificate by Friday, end of day. If you do not receive it, please let me know, and you can reach me at cweeks@harmonyfoundationinc.com. We also do record these webinars, and if you're interested in receiving the recorded version, you can email me at the same email listed on the screen, and I'll be happy to share it with you, or you can find it on our website under the professional tab with webinars, archived webinars. If you're interested in the slide deck, you can reach out to Andrea directly, and she will share her contact information at the end of the presentation. Andrea will be addressing questions during the presentation as appropriate for the subject, and any questions that are not answered during the presentation will be answered at the end. Feel free to use your questions box on the right-hand side to type them in, and we'll kind of keep track of those throughout the hour. I'd like to take a moment to say thank you to the Nectar Group. You can find out more about them at the link listed on the screen, www.thenectargroup.com. With that, I would like to introduce the founder and executive director of the Nectar Group and our presenter today, Andrea Pittman. Andrea is the executive director and owner of the Nectar Group. She is a master level certified cognitive coach with over 21 years of experience working with students and families through cognitive skills training, consulting, and teaching. Originally from, and please forgive me if I butcher this, Leander, Texas?
That's right. Correct.
Andrea received her education and teaching certification from Southwestern University in Georgetown. She has consulted with over 80 learning centers across the U.S. to help improve student outcomes. With a rich background in education and neuroscience, she has always striven to pinpoint the root issues of learning challenges and create comprehensive plans of action to help students achieve excellent results. She is proud to call Denver her home, and when not sharing the benefits of cognitive training, she enjoys traveling, cooking, reading, the arts, and spending time outdoors. And so that all being said, and so excited to introduce her, It is now time to turn it over to Andrea. There we go.
Christy, can you hear me? Is that good?
I can hear you and I can see you.
Perfect. There we go. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I'm so excited to be able to share with you what I hope to be some very valuable information, of course, for you and those that you serve. I'll give a little apology in advance. I have a little bit of a cough, so if you hear some coughing or throat clearing, that's just me dealing with that. But the work that we do at the Nectar Group is very unique. I'm only aware of 7 programs in the US and Canada that do what we do. So I want to share with you just a little bit briefly more about who we are so that you can understand where this information is coming from that I'm going to share today. Then we'll jump right into our topic. Please do ask questions, as Christy said, and if I'm unable to address them as we go through, I'll do my best to answer them at the end as well. And as I'm saying that, I'm going to make sure I have my board open here where I can see your questions. So the Nectar Group is a cognitive neuroscience and education company dedicated to helping individuals overcome learning and memory challenges so that they can reach their full potential. We're grounded in neuroscience and we change the brain by delivering customized cognitive training, tutoring, and study skills programs for individuals of all ages. With our assessment-driven process, we use scientific tools to evaluate and pinpoint the root cause of learning challenges. Then we create custom solutions that resolve those root issues. So we help clients improve memory, decision-making, and clarity of thought through increased cognitive function, thus allowing them to glean more from complementary therapies. At the Nectar Group, we work with clients of all ages, and those in recovery are typically post-acute detox. We don't take them when they're in the middle of their detox process, of course. And we see them either at a rehab facility or when they've transitioned afterwards. A significant amount of our clients have diagnoses such as ADHD, dyslexia, learning disabilities, traumatic brain injuries, post-concussion syndrome, and reduced cognitive function due to drug or alcohol abuse. The National Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse at Columbia University actually explains that individuals in substance abuse treatment have a higher incidence of learning disabilities than the general population. One recent study revealed that 40% of people in substance abuse treatment have a learning disability. Excuse me, and another indicated that in residential substance abuse treatment programs, the percentage of people with learning disabilities has been found to be as high as 60%. So we see this very commonly with our clients who are in recovery. They have just a higher rate of learning disability that may have been there all along. They also typically have a higher rate of brain injuries and concussions. They're more accident prone because they've been under the influence of one or more substances. And then the substances that they have been using, that they have abused, tend to also cause some cognitive or, the damage to the brain and the brain function. So as a population, they just have greater needs and greater impact to this the cognitive function and their brain abilities. So we do work with other clients who also are in this process, and they really want to just gain back the competitive edge for returning to higher education or the workplace. Obviously, after rehab and as they enter into recovery, a lot of people are making choices to go back to school or to go back to work and want to restore what they may have damaged or lost throughout their disease of addiction. So we do offer all of our services in our center, our clinic in Greenwood Village, Colorado, but we also go on site to rehab centers and transitional homes to provide therapies. And then we provide therapies nationally and internationally via our online e-coaching services, which is basically our telehealth division. So we have some key goals for today, and we really hope that you gain the following things. First is to understand the role of cognitive skills within the recovery process. 2 is to understand how cognitive skills can be improved. And 3 is to understand the services that are available to help improve cognitive function and to kind of resolve some of those deficits that you might be seeing with some of your clients. So to understand the role that cognitive skills play in recovery, we actually have to understand what are cognitive skills. We hear the term cognitive a lot, especially in mental health in terms of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which I'm sure many of you provide for your clients. But when we're talking about cognitive skills, we're really talking about these 7 underlying key skills that make up how we process and learn information. They're the skills that actually make up our IQ or our intelligence. So we're going to walk through each of these skills and just give you a little bit more explanation on them so you can understand what we're pinpointing. So first skill we're going to talk about is short-term memory. This is also known as working memory. This involves information recalled after less than 1 minute. So if you imagine in your brain that you have 2 buckets, one is for short term and one is for long term, and either bucket can have leaks. And so if you have a weak short-term memory, you can be pouring in lots of great information through therapy, learning different strategies to utilize. But if you have leaks in your bucket, it runs right out. And so it never makes it even over to your long-term memory, which of course makes it really difficult to implement those strategies and new skills and information that you've learned. So kind of the most common symptoms we see when someone is struggling with short-term memory deficits is that information will go in one ear and out the other. The people with low short-term memory can really struggle with difficulty paying attention. It looks a lot like ADHD. And in fact, over 90% of people with ADHD have low short-term memory. So there's a strong connection there. And they also just have difficulty tracking new information. If information is coming in one ear and going out the other, it's really hard to track and assimilate all that information. The second area is processing speed, and processing speed is the rate that the brain can take in information, route it to the right location, and process it. It's what controls how well we take in information, as well as how we organize our thoughts to get them back out, either from pen to paper, from head to like our pen to paper, or in just speaking and communicating. We often compare this to the internet speed of a computer. So if you think about, you could have a supercomputer, but if you plug it into dial-up internet, it's going to struggle to function. You're going to get the little hourglass turning or the beach ball spinning, and it's going to be slow and seem like the whole computer is broken, when really it's just the speed at which it's processing. So people that have slow processing are typically really frustrated. Communication is frustrating. It feels like the environment goes faster than they are processing. So even in, say, like group counseling, they may be able to have a response to something, some part of a discussion, but they can't formulate that response till maybe 3 to 4, 5, 6 minutes, and the conversation at that point has already moved on. And now they've missed what the next part is. So they tend to withdraw sometimes because of that frustration. People with slow processing tend to zone out during group learning or meetings. This again sometimes looks like ADHD because they're zoning out. And they often need more time to complete tasks, where if you took someone that had strong processing speed and you had them complete the same, say, worksheet or activity as someone who has slow processing speed, the slower processor may take 2 or 3 times the duration. The next skill we're going to look at is long-term memory. So this is the ability to both store and recall information for later use. Pretty clear. We do have different types of long-term memory. We have experiential and emotional memory. We also have more academic or factual memory. So we all experience this. Like, you might not remember what you ate for dinner 2 nights ago, but you remember every detail of like an amazing dinner you had on a vacation to Mexico 5 years ago, because you had an experience, it had an emotional connection. You probably had a flood of neurochemicals bathing your brain with endorphins that allowed you to really be able to remember that. It imprinted on your brain differently. When we're looking at cognitive function, we're looking at maybe a less exciting type of long-term memory. We're looking at more academic or factual memory. So this might be, memorizing information, facts and figures. You think about all of us in our work, we have to really utilize this type of memory so that we're being able to access and implement the skills and the knowledge that we need to complete our responsibilities. So Of course, you could actually have a low short-term memory and then not very much information is being captured there. And then when it gets dumped into the long term, it can also be leaking. Or you could have a strong short-term memory, but when it gets to the long term, it leaks. And so when we see, the most common symptoms of weak long-term memory are that the individual will struggle to retain strategies and information learned in therapies. You may find yourself having to repeat to them multiple times, something that you're kind of in your head going, we've already covered this 5 or 6 times, and they're still struggling to remember it and recall it and, of course, implement it. They can have a difficulty or inability to recall important life events accurately. This can really cause a lot of frustration for family members or spouses or friends or even coworkers, where their perception of what happened is really different than everyone else's because they're not remembering it correctly. Of course, if you take damage to the long-term memory and then you couple that with damage, or just that they were maybe under the influence, and that can cloud memory too, of course. It can be a kind of a perfect storm. And then we have another common effect is just really negative impact on job performance and the ability to learn new skills in the workplace. Most things that we learn, one concept builds upon the next. So if you're not retaining the prerequisite concept, of course, it makes the next one that much more difficult. Our next skill is visual processing. This is the ability to perceive, analyze, and think in visual images. We call this a lot of times the mind's eye. So this is our ability to make pictures. You do this every time, if you're an avid reader, you enjoy reading and you're reading a novel and you make a movie in your mind of what you're reading. This is what allows us to do this. If you practice a mindfulness practice of guided visualization as a form of maybe meditation or stress reduction, and they're describing you on a beach somewhere and you're hearing the waves crash and feeling the hot sand beneath your body, your ability to visualize yourself there is your visual processing. And so the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism found that the most prevalent alcohol-associated brain impairments affect visual spatial abilities and higher cognitive functioning, such as logic and reasoning. So we know that this one in particular is really negatively impacted by alcohol abuse. Symptoms of weak visual processing are typically poor memory. The reason that visual processing has a connection to memory is that our brains store memories as images. And so when, we use this all the time. If you lose your keys, I might say to you, where did you see them last? And you'll close your eyes maybe even, or kind of look up, and you'll visualize your keys sitting on your nightstand, and that triggers your memory. And so we know that if people aren't making visual images to what they're learning or the information they're taking in, they don't retain it very well. We also see that this impacts their spatial awareness, which is actually our judgment of space in actual 3D distance. And so this can actually impact driving. And so it can certainly have a safety component to it. We also see that they cannot visualize an imagined future scenario. And this is really important, I think, in terms of recovery, because I think a really effective technique is to be able to visualize yourself in a potential future situation, and so that you can create a mental picture of how you're going to handle that in a healthier, more effective way. So maybe a trigger for someone is every time they're in a conversation with their mother, they're triggered and are more likely to lapse back into addiction. And so they can, a great technique is to visualize themselves in that situation, in that conversation, and using their coping techniques and skills to handle it successfully and more smoothly without reverting to unhealthy coping mechanisms. And unfortunately, if their visual processing is damaged, it's really difficult for them to be able to make those pictures. Our next area is logic and reasoning. So this is the ability to reason, problem solve, and plan. This is a key area of improvement for those struggling with addiction, as it's really the part of the brain that allows you to connect consequences with behavior. It's also your ability to see the overall big picture. So this is that ability to see the forest. it's really interesting. We see actually that among populations of people who are incarcerated, when they have studied them with lower or with cognitive testing, they found that logic and reasoning is usually the lowest skill, which makes sense because if you're not able to connect consequence with behavior, it's harder to think through and make good decisions. So we see that people that are weak in logic and reasoning don't typically understand how their decisions connect to consequences. They're poor decision makers. Their responses don't always fit with questions asked. So you might be, say, in a group setting or in a conversation with them, and they ask a question or give an answer to a question, and it seems like they're coming from left field. That's because they're not connecting the dots in the same way that with sound logic, someone with sound logic would do. And then finally, they have an inability to apply concepts, or a difficulty at least, to apply concepts from one situation to another. They have a harder time reading between the lines or kind of deciphering hidden meanings. I always say this is the skill that allows you to read a contract to know if you're getting ripped off or not. So it can be really important, again, just for navigating life in the workplace and being a good problem solver. Our next skill is auditory processing. This is the ability to hear and distinguish different sounds and make sense of verbal information. It's actually the area that when we're looking to diagnose someone with something like dyslexia or an actual reading disability, this is the part of the brain that we're looking at primarily. So when someone has low auditory processing, it does actually really impact their reading skills. It might be a dyslexia diagnosis. They might mispronounce words, maybe another way that you see that show up. They also do better with visual cues or teaching that's visual in nature. So for them, instead of just taking notes or reading a handout, like actually drawing it out, making a note card with like pictures and cues that are visual can help a lot better, because they do typically struggle to process verbal information. And as adults, a lot of our information, of course, comes to us verbally. And so that can be a big challenge and a point of frustration as well. Our last skill we're going to talk about, it's the 7th core cognitive skill, is our attention. So we all know what attention struggles look like, right? We all struggle to some degree with attention. You know, if you're tired, distracted, have a lot going on. But when we look at actual true attention issues, this might result in an ADHD diagnosis. The National Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse at Columbia University explains that studies show that as many as half of those suffering with ADHD self-medicate with drugs and alcohol. So an individual with ADHD is twice as likely as one without ADHD to abuse substances. So in our clients that are working in their recovery with us, this is a biggie for them. They find that they're slower to complete tasks, more impulsive, and have difficulty tuning out distractions, which can be a significant disruptor to their personal lives as well as professionally. So now that we have a better understanding of the cognitive skills and the common symptoms of weak skills, let's look at the role these skills play in recovery. So we call this the recovery pyramid, as you can see, because we found that an individual in recovery needs all 3 tiers of this pyramid to really be successful. So we start with the base of the pyramid. Of course, we build it from the base up with tier 1. And this is where we want to strengthen cognitive skills due to the pre-existing learning challenges that may be existent in someone in recovery, but also due to any damage that has been done through injury or the substance abuse itself. And so in order for the other strategies and behaviors to truly develop, the cognitive skills must be addressed first, or at least simultaneously, because we need this strong foundation for counseling therapies, support systems, and self-management to really work. The way we strengthen these skills is through an intervention called cognitive training, which is then supported by exercise, nutrition, and stress management. Cognitive training is a lot like exercise for your body, but it's for the brain. And we'll talk more about that and how that is done next. But let's look at tier 2. This is our learning strategies. And you can see the different types of strategies as some examples and the different types of therapies we all are familiar with that we use to learn, to help our clients learn new strategies. And then tier 3 is about actually implementing those strategies and changing behaviors. So when cognitive skills are strengthened, it's easier to learn, remember, and implement strategies, and thus individuals are more able to change their behaviors for the better. A lot of adults work on all the 3 tiers simultaneously to create the best support system possible. It is really amazing to see that how difficult recovery can be when you have damage to your brain function. It's just harder. Everything is harder. It's completely doable, but you have to work 10 times harder if you have a weak memory or a lack of logic and, affecting you. So I want to talk about next, how do we actually change cognitive function? So what is it? Why can we change this? How do we change it? And it's thanks to neuroplasticity. So you may be familiar with this term. Neuro equals the brain or neurons, and plasticity, think of it as like plastic, which means malleable, moldable, flexible. So one of our greatest kind of things I think to be grateful for is that our brains have plasticity. They have an ability to change, and we're not born, or we're not stuck with what we're born with. So we're also not stuck with any damage that we've done. There's pretty amazing things that can be done to repair damage. So there's a lot of hope in this. When we're working with clients, it's really interesting to see a lot of them have to grieve the loss of some of their cognitive function when they really come to terms through like an assessment and really seeing how low their cognitive function may be in one or more areas. But we're able to really give them a lot of hope based on this neuroplasticity and the ability to really change. So when we know that someone is low in a skill, say such as logic and reasoning or memory, they have less neurons firing in that part of the brain. And you can actually see this on a brain scan. We have in our brains what are called white matter tracts, which at a really simple level are like highways throughout our brains. There's a law in neuroscience called Hebb's Law, which says neurons that fire together wire together. So a person with a deficit in their cognitive skills, when we look under a scan at their actual white matter tracts, their tracts are narrow and kind of bumpy, versus a person who has stronger skills will have wide and smooth tracts. So the analogy that we use is that the person with the person with the weak skills has a highway system of dirt roads versus paved highways. And so information gets stuck, it falls in potholes, it slows down. We all know what it's like to drive on a bumpy pothole dirt road versus a paved highway. And that's how the information moves throughout the brain. So the way that we treat a weak skill is to get the neurons to fire and wire together and thus pave the road. And when the neurons fire and wire together, we build larger and more complex neural networks or highway systems. And as a result, our cognitive skills work better and deficits are repaired. This is very similar to how the way cognitive training works is very similar to how the body works with physical exercise. So as an example, if I have a weak bicep, we all know that I could work with a personal trainer, lift weights, and if I do that repeatedly enough, for long enough, I'm going to eventually look in the mirror and have a bigger, stronger bicep. The stress that I'm putting on that muscle is going to trigger my brain to respond to that, and my body, I should say, to respond to that and build muscle tissue. The brain is really no different. It's just not building muscle tissue, it's building those neural connections. So the same as with cognitive skills, prescribed and repetitive exercises for the brain build stronger, more bonded neural networks. The neat thing about when we do engage in cognitive training is that it is truly a corrective measure. So it actually treats the root issue, making it better rather than just accommodating or compensating for a deficit. So for example, if I have a weak memory, I did a lot of work with soldiers coming back from Afghanistan down at Fort Carson in Colorado Springs, and a lot of them had traumatic brain injuries. And so one of the things that they would come into me with is, They were writing everything down, had a million checklists, used sticky notes, set reminders on their phones, just had to do a lot of compensatory measures to just remember what time they had a doctor's appointment, or a chore they needed to do for their wife at home, or something like that. And so that's an accommodation or compensating for that deficit. When we engage in cognitive training, we're actually building a better memory, thus eliminating the need for those accommodations. Now, we all know that sometimes we have a lot on our plate and we still need to make a checklist, but this is allowing you to remember at a functional level where you don't have to have so many kind of crutches to help you through that. So you can see muscles change in the mirror, but it's a lot harder to see it with the brain. So it's a lot harder for us to kind of get this and to understand it because we can't see it with our eyes. The neat thing is that brain imaging does allow us to see changes, and there are several types of imaging that can be used to look at the function of the cognitive skills. One of the most common ways that we look at this is through neural activity or metabolic activity through a functional MRI. I'll show you a simple example of one of these. So this is someone's brain who actually has some auditory processing and processing speed deficits. They are actually dyslexic. And so when you look at the pre-intervention, there are, where those two circles are, there's a little bit of red, kind of light pink in the frontal circle, but really none in the temporal parietal. And so what this is we know is there's a lack of metabolic activity or neurons firing and wiring together in those two spots, which are where what's called the AFQ connects. And it's basically the white matter track for auditory processing. In the second image, this is after only 8 weeks of cognitive training, we see increased activity in both parts of the brain, showing us that activity is really having a neural effect. Excuse me, is having a neural effect, and we're actually seeing changes of those following Hebb's law, neurons that fire together are wiring together. So it's pretty exciting. The imaging has advanced significantly. I've been doing this for about 21 years, and just in the past 5 years, what we can see on the images is pretty amazing. How we can now see like an individual neuron, two individual neurons coming together and fusing, or in the case of neural pruning, where we're breaking a habit or wanting to lose a skill, we see them actually breaking apart and being reused for something else. So it's pretty fun and exciting to see that. And like I said earlier, it gives hope for all of us that we can change our brains to this degree. So cognitive training that I'm talking about is a type of brain training. So think of this umbrella called brain training, and research shows that there are currently 4 types of brain training that are scientifically proven to rewire the brain and create lasting changes. There are probably other types, but these are the 4 that have enough research that the neuroscience community feels confident saying these are the 4 types that we can actually see, scientifically evidenced. Imaging supports it, that we're actually changing the brain. And so the first area is what we've been talking about, is cognitive training. That's Nectar's expertise. That's what we do. There's also biofeedback, which you're probably familiar with. Neurofeedback is a type of biofeedback, and it's not rewiring the white matter tracks, it's rewiring and how the brain waves work, of course. And then we have mindfulness-based meditation. So you may have read, if you haven't, look them up, they're pretty interesting. There's some really great studies where you can actually see brain scans of meditators versus non-meditators. I'm sure other types of meditation has a positive effect, but the research has largely focused on mindfulness-based meditation, primarily because it's a non-religious type meditation that can be used in research really successfully because people don't have to have a religious affiliation with it to successfully implement it. So there's quite a bit of research on mindfulness-based meditation. And then the 4th type of brain training is reframing. So this is used a lot in counseling and psychotherapy. EMDR is an example of this. CBT is also cognitive behavioral therapy, is a type of reframing. And so we know that all of those 4 categories actually do show measurable changes to the brain. So when we are talking about correcting deficits in cognitive function, the appropriate intervention is cognitive training. So I want to talk to you about how you can engage, or your clients could engage in cognitive training if they have deficits in one or more of these areas. The most effective way is through one-to-one cognitive training with someone that's called a certified cognitive coach. This is a therapy that is designed to really hone in and target those specific skills. It's an intensive therapy. It's typically done 4 times per week for 50 minutes each time. The minimum amount of duration of therapy is over 10 weeks. It can be done in person at a clinic or research facility, or we offer it also remotely through video conferencing through telehealth services. It's actually pretty exciting. We've been doing it this way for 6 years so that we can actually start treating people while they're in a rehab facility, or if they start near us, but they move back home or relocate after they transition out of an inpatient facility, then they're able to continue that wherever they live. We've had clients as far away as Indonesia and Hong Kong and South America, as well as people, of course, here in our backyard. And the therapy must address specific individual needs and really pinpoint the skills that are for that individual's unique profile. So this again is a pretty focused and intense intervention. Other ways that you can do where you don't need to go and work with a coach are that there are some apps that can help support this. It's not going to be to the corrective degree that one-to-one therapy is going to do, but there is an app called Elevate. I recommend you check it out. You can download it from the App Store or the Play Store, wherever you get your apps from. And Elevate actually won Apple's App of the Year a few years ago. It was written by a team of neuroscientists who hired gamers to write the interface. They do have a free version, and then you can upgrade to a paid version that's a subscription, like $5 a month, I think. So it's reasonable, and it's really fun. It's a lot of different games. It has a little bit of an academic spin, like building your vocabulary and reading speed and quickly being able to do mental math. But it was written for teenagers through adults. And so I work with a lot of adults who get pretty competitive with it, so it's pretty fun. And then there's also Lumosity. You may be familiar with Lumosity. They do a lot of advertising, lumosity.com. They have a desktop version as well as an app. The desktop version does have quite a bit more activities, about 65 games, versus, and the app has, I think, something around 25 games, but you can play it both ways, and that can really help. Elevate helps a lot more with auditory issues, and Lumosity is much more visual, so you can kind of pick which one might be better for an individual based on that. Other things that you can do that are pretty fun and easy are board and card games that use cognitive skills. So card games and board games can be a great way. I could give you hundreds, but I listed just a couple here just for example, the purpose of example. But there's a game called the 5-second rule that's really fun. It's super easy and quick to play, and it works on long-term memory retrieval and processing speed. So it's a great one. And then also, chess is a great classic example of logic and reasoning. I have all kinds of resources of other types of games that you could play or utilize with clients. So I'm always happy you can reach out to me after the webinar and I can send you some resources for that. One really interesting little side story is that we have a client who came to us while he was in rehab. And after he finished his rehab and he began working with us while he was inpatient, and then continued for about 6 months of therapy with us. And he wanted, after he graduated his Nectar program, his one-to-one cognitive training, he wanted to be able to really continue to strengthen and enhance his skills. And so he created actually a sober board and card game club that started with a couple of people. And last time I talked to him has grown to about 50 people in recovery get together once a week and play games. And he's actually taught me a lot of new games that really enhance cognitive skills because they've worked their way through just about everything on the market. So it's pretty fun to see that. Another way to enhance your cognitive function is just learning something new. Foreign language, coding, learning a new computer program. It has to really be something that stretches you though, and that you've never done before. So it is exposing your brain to something new to stimulate those neural connections. So when we're talking about cognitive training, you can have really varied results based on if it subscribes to the type of cognitive training you're doing, subscribes to kind of best practice principles. So the research shows us that there are 12 principles that must be present for cognitive training to actually generalize to real life and to really benefit someone beyond just getting better at the exercises themselves. So there are effective and ineffective ways to complete cognitive training. And I would say the good news is that we can change our brains and our cognitive skills, but the challenging part is that it requires a lot of hard work to do so. So I've listed 4 of kind of the top principles that must be part of cognitive training for it to be effective. The first is that it must be intense. So it must be true mental exercise. Think about there's mental exercise and there's mental activity, just like physical exercise is physical activity. You know, me going to the mall and shopping, I'm getting some physical activity, but it's not probably really exercise. Exercise would be something like getting my heart rate up in a cardio workout for a sustained period of time at my target heart rate with no breaks. And that's what cognitive training needs to feel like. It also has to be frequent. The research shows that a minimum of 4 times per week is recommended. And then it must be sustained. So 20 minutes is really the minimum that you can do to get lasting changes, but 50 minutes is optimal. And then it also must be targeted. So you have to work with individuals on their specific bottlenecks. So for example, if someone's weakness is processing speed, but they're going online and playing memory games, it isn't going to be effective for them. I mean, their memory might get a little bit better, but it's not going to actually resolve the issue, the cognitive issue that they have. So knowing exactly where the bottlenecks are allows us to target the specific needs. This can be determined most effectively through cognitive testing, which I'll cover shortly, but also doing some self-assessment to pinpoint where your weaknesses are can be a way to start with that. We do provide clients checklists to kind of look at their symptoms and then see which cognitive skills that match up to so that they know where to focus and what to work on. So if you remember back to our recovery period we covered earlier in the presentation, on the first tier, there were a few other bullets. It showed the cognitive skills training, and then below that, there were some other bullets that help support cognitive skill function. We call these the pillars of brain health. So for cognitive training to work at optimal levels, the brain needs to be supported. So this is no different than an athlete taking care of their body for optimal athletic performance. I'm going to walk you through the 3 most important pillars with one highlight for each. There's a lot, any one of these could be like an entire webinar unto their own, but I'm just going to give you kind of, if I was only going to tell you to do one thing in each of these categories, then it would be, this would be what I would tell you to do. So the first is physical exercise. So physical exercise is important for brain health for many reasons, but one is that when new neural connections are forming, the brain needs what's called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's abbreviated as BDNF. That's easier to remember. But this is a protein at a really basic level without going into all the biology of it, but this is a protein that is one of the key building blocks in the brain. And the reason I'm talking about BDNF is it's a necessity when we build new neural connections. And so when we build those new neural connections, one of the building blocks is BDNF, and a great way to trigger your brain to manufacture BDNF is interval training. So this could be interval training through, like, there's all kinds of hardcore interval training workouts, but it can literally be, even if you're going for a walk, that you walk briskly for 2 minutes and then have, 4 minutes of recovery speed, and then you're like speed walking for 2 minutes and then slowing back down. It's that back and forth of intense with less intense exercise. You can do it on a bike, you can do it swimming, you can do it running, really any kind of exercise. You can do this, and that interval training does trigger the brain, like I said, to make that BDNF. The second area is nutrition. So if you only made one change to the diet to help with brain health, it would be to consume more healthy fats. You can make a good argument it's also to reduce sugar, but today we'll talk about increasing healthy fats. It's always easier when you're trying to make dietary or nutritional changes to focus on what you need to do more of versus focusing on the things we need to restrict. So when we're asking neurons to kind of fire and wire together, the myelin sheath is involved in that. And 60% of the myelin sheath, that's that fatty tissue that protects the end of each nerve ending, that fatty tissue is 60% of it is DHA, which is an essential fatty acid found in the most heaviest concentration in fish oil. So in omega-3s, we all have heard of omega-3s, I'm sure. So when we talk about increasing healthy fats in the diet, it's coconut oil, avocado, olive oil, grass-fed butter, walnuts, fatty fish such as salmon. It is hard to eat enough of this to keep our brains healthy. I was at a conference about a year ago put on by Harvard Medical School, and they were explaining that the average person would need to eat 8 servings, as in EIGHT, 8 servings per week of salmon to get the right level of omega-3s for our brains. And obviously it's hard to eat that much. Now you get it from other sources besides salmon, of course, but it's hard to eat our way to enough healthy fat. And so we do recommend with our clients that they consider supplementing their diet with fish oil as well. And so we do give some dietary guidelines based on some really great physicians that we work with in terms of how much fish oil to take, what kind to take, those types of things. So we do have great resources on that I'm also happy to share with you if you want to reach out to me after the webinar. And then finally, a stress reduction. We all know that when we're stressed, we don't think clearly, right? And there's multiple reasons for that. Our brain gets in fight or flight. It shuts down the higher level thinking skills. But it also does actually do some damage to the neurons. And it's really hard for neurons to fire and wire together when the brain is being flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. And so due to the research on the benefits of mindfulness-based meditation, we actually, when our clients see us at Nectar for their sessions, we begin every single session with a mindfulness exercise. We call these mindful minutes, and we teach about 30 different techniques so that clients can begin to build up their own toolkit. Obviously, there's lots of different ways that they can learn mindfulness, and we recommend that they develop a daily, even a short 10-minute mindfulness practice to help optimize brain health and support their cognitive training. The Calm app, many of you might be familiar with. If you're not, I definitely recommend to check it out. It has just a wealth of resources. I use it truly on a daily basis in a lot of different capacities. It's a tool that can be really helpful for this. So it's a great one to help your clients get plugged into. So I mentioned earlier that targeting specific bottlenecks is key to successful cognitive training. So whether someone is going to work with a coach through like an intensive therapy, or they independently want to work on building their cognitive skills, it benefits them tremendously to have an assessment to pinpoint the issues. So at Nectar, we do provide assessments that help pinpoint the root causes of a person's struggles, and we then customize interventions and can recommend those appropriately. We have a comprehensive assessment team that consists of 2 clinical psychologists, a school psychologist, and a team of psychometrists that help give the answers needed for this. We have a full range of testing from comprehensive cognitive assessments to full psychoeducational testing. For our adult clients that maybe want to return to school, we can also do academic testing, of course. we do that testing. One of the exciting things is that we do offer that testing in our clinic, but as well as remotely through telehealth services. So we can actually even test someone while they're in rehab if they're struggling with some of these issues, so that we can help their support team and their care team really pinpoint how much of their challenges are due to cognitive deficits and how much are due to something else, you know, to the actual detox process or to psychological issues, et cetera. So once testing is completed, when someone tests with us, our director, it's either me or we have another director, Danny, who meets with the individual and their support team. That might be family members, it might be their social worker, their case manager, their counselor, whomever is appropriate for their case, to determine whether an intervention such as cognitive training is the best next step for them. What are realistic expectations from cognitive training? What could they do in a therapeutic sense, as well as independently on their own at home or at rehab? And so we're really trying to determine that best next step. We do provide that one-to-one customized intervention. All of it's delivered by certified degreed professionals. And for our clients who have a desire to return to school or work or both, we also offer tutoring, as I mentioned previously. We do study skills and also executive function coaching to help them be really prepared for that transition. And then based on what their testing reveals, we do refer out for another therapy if needed. Like I said, also, if someone's not at the phase where we want to test, but we want to just start to do kind of a checklist with people that are working with them or themselves, we do offer checklists where they can look at symptoms and see what cognitive skills those are associated with. So they can begin to pinpoint, yep, hey, all these issues I'm having match a typical memory deficit. And so they're able to start to understand more about what's going on with them. One of the neat things is how impactful cognitive training can be to the brain and to someone's life and their quality of life. So when we have clients engage in cognitive training, we see significant improvements in memory, sharper attention and focus. Of our clients who are being treated for ADHD with pharmaceutical intervention, we see 70% of them are able to come off of their meds with as few as 4 months of therapy. So that's pretty exciting to see. We also see an improved ability to implement recovery strategies. One of our clients who graduated, he had relapsed actually 4 times and now has had a very long time of sobriety and being successful. And he talks about our recovery pyramid. And he told me, he said, you know, all the other times I had great strategies and I was really working to change my behaviors, but because my logic was so messed up, as he would say in a polite way, and because my memory was so damaged, I just couldn't function. And I found myself slipping in depression because of my inability to work. He was on full-time disability. And now he's been able to actually, with treating those cognitive skills, get off of disability and move back into the workplace and has a lot more purpose and meaning in his life. And he said, now I actually can, it's still hard, but I can remember the strategies that I learned in rehab now to implement, which is super exciting to see. Better job in school performance, of course, depending on the phase someone's in their life. We also see clearer thinking. A lot of the cog fog or cloudiness that exists post, detox for clients is really cleared up. We see faster processing, just ability to think and communicate more quickly, and actually higher IQ. So cognitive skills are what make up our IQ. So when cognitive skills go up, we see IQ go up too. On average, we see an IQ increase of about 17 standard score points, which is more than a full standard deviation. It's pretty exciting to see someone really get back what they've lost and be able to kind of restore that for them and help them restore that for themselves. There's a chart there on your screen that shows for each of the core cognitive skills, except for attention, because it's not measured in the same way, what the average percentile point increase is. for change. So for example, if someone was starting at the 30th percentile in short-term memory, we would typically see after therapy, they would be at the 57.7 percentile ranking. So moving from well below average to being on the other side of the mean, or the median, the 50th percentile. So really being able to fully recover these areas, which is a pretty awesome thing to see and to be a part of. In terms of when we utilize, we're going to move into some questions here in a second, but in terms of how you can help your clients like utilize, or how you can help them benefit from cognitive training, obviously you can help them with implementing some of the things that we covered today. I'm happy again to share the slides with you so that you have that information. We also offer anyone free consultations for their clients, or if you want to consult with me on a client to see if this would be worth exploring to help them, then we're always happy to talk with you or them or both at no cost. So please don't hesitate to, consider reaching out and talking to me about that. I'm super happy to help. Our goal is always to get clients to the right resources, and if that's not us based on their cognitive issues, we can typically get you to what can. I'll share with you just briefly our referral process. So a patient or facility staff member contacts the Nectar group via phone, email, text, whatever way they want to complete an intake call so we can find the best next steps, whether that be for assessment, a consultation, or outside referral. Where helpful, we may provide them with we can also provide like a referral slip or a brochure or something that kind of gives them more information first. We also offer assessments, and then as we talked about, and then results meetings are scheduled, and if applicable, then intervention would begin. Our time from first contact with a client to their assessment results is approximately 2 weeks. So we do have a pretty quick turnaround. We have certain times a year, like the week of Thanksgiving is super busy because we actually also work with children. And so whenever kids are out of school, that's a big popular time for families to get their children assessed. So holidays are always a little bit backed up, but typically our turnaround time is only 2 weeks. And then we continue to collaborate with the facility for continuity of care. So I would love just to answer any questions that anyone has, and use our remaining time to cover that if there are questions. I've put up my contact information, our phone number, and then we have an email. It's kind of generic, but it'll filter to the right place, which is getanswers@thenectargroup.com. And then I'm happy to provide you with answers or additional resources there.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Andrea. I think we do have a question here. Do you see I founded the Reentry Initiative?
I do. I can only see part of it. Oh, there we go.
Do you want me to read the whole thing, or can you see it all?
I actually can see it now.
Okay.
This is a question about how can I assess my participants' needs for cognitive training and then provide the needed training. So the first step with that is really just, that could be a conversation we could have in terms of for your organization and your specific clientele. But we typically look at, again, I can provide a checklist that's an initial kind of, if you answer yes to enough of these, then cognitive assessment may be the best next step. We can also begin with, we do some services where with certain populations, we actually come in and provide a cognitive screening at no cost for the entire population to help determine who would be benefiting, who would benefit from further testing and or intervention.
Perfect. I do have, my questions are hard to see too sometimes. Let's see. I'm checking. I think I had one other question I wanted to run by you. Here we go. So a person has asked that she would like to talk to you, he or she would like to talk to you about how to integrate the training with their cognitive behavioral pre-LAS programming. I'm assuming there's a misspelling, produced by the University of Cincinnati Corrections Institute. So if you would like to address that.
Yeah, I think that's talking about a pre-release program. It looks like for probably people who are incarcerated. So there is a pretty interesting, I was actually had the opportunity to be part of a study where we were doing testing for people that were incarcerated and looking at their cognitive function to treat any cognitive issues before release. And one of the exciting things is that there's a lot of research that needs to be done, but the preliminary levels really showed that when you actually treat cognitive issues, return to prison rates reduce radically. Because obviously, if you give them better thinking skills, you're actually truly rehabilitating certain skills and some of the causes for why they may have landed there in the first place. So I think that's a much more comprehensive conversation. So I can definitely follow up with this person, or you can certainly reach out to me with my contact, and we can schedule a phone call to go over that more in depth with what options would be that would look like that.
Wow. Perfect. Thank you so much, Andrea. We are out of time today, but I want to touch base on a few things for everybody. If you're interested in the slide deck, contact Andrea at the contact information listed on the screen. If you're interested in the audio, I put my email in the chat box earlier. Please feel free to reach out to me. I'll send that to you. Certificates go out end of day by Friday. And our next webinar will be in January of 2020, so I won't see you all until next year. Please keep your eyes peeled for information about that webinar in December. Wishing everybody the happiest of holidays. Thank you so much for your interest in the Harmony webinar series. Andrea, thank you for your time and the great presentation. We certainly appreciate it. Have a great day.